So, little Johnny, a very bright 5-year-old, told his dad he'd like to have a baby brother. And along with his request, offered to do whatever he could to help. So his dad paused for a moment and then replied, "I tell you what, Johnny, if you pray every day for 2 months for a baby brother, I guarantee that you will be given one." So Johnny responded eagerly to his dad's challenge and went to bed early that night to start praying for a baby brother. And so he prayed every night for a whole month. But after that time, he began to get skeptical. He checked around his neighborhood and found out that what he thought was going to happen had never occurred ever in the history of anybody he knew. You just don't pray for 2 months and then whammo, a new baby brother shows up. So Johnny just quit praying. And after another month, Johnny's mother went to the hospital. And when she came back home, Johnny's parents called him into the bedroom. And he cautiously walked in, not expecting to find anything, but he noticed there was a little bundle lying right next to his mom. And his dad pulled back the blanket, and there was not only one baby brother, but 2. Wow! He had twin baby brothers. And so Johnny's dad looked down at him and said, "Now, aren't you glad, Johnny, that you prayed?" And Johnny hesitated a little and looked up at his dad and said, "Yeah, but aren't you glad I quit when I did?" Little Johnny. So, we're continuing to move through this focus on the book, How to Pray Without Talking to God. And I feel like I really want to just kind of presence, and because I don't know if I did this last week, why now are we focusing on this book? Well, first of all, you have 6 people that are going through a prayer chaplain training. Did you know that? And last weekend, we were together all weekend. And let me tell you, after this whole training is over, we're going to be really close. We're going to know each other really well. Because there's a whole nother night, and then there's a whole nother weekend, and then a whole nother night. And then we're going to celebrate them on Easter Sunday. So that's one reason. And here we are in the midst of the season for peace and nonviolence. And so in the middle of our spiritual activism class, people are saying, what can I do? What can I do with what we're seeing in the world? And this has been a question, not just since, the political thing is being kind of interesting these days. This has been a question for a long time. How do we hold our world when we see things in our world that are incongruent with what we know is true? Prayer. The power of prayer. So how can we hold knowing? How can we really hold in prayer so that we feel like we're really doing something? And of course, along with moving our feet. So that's why it just felt perfect to be exploring this book right now. So this is our second week in delving into the book, How to Pray Without Talking to God. And by the way, if you want to follow along with us, there's books in the bookstore, a little commercial there. In the Illumination bookstore, there's plenty of books. So last week, we talked about evolving our view of God. Evolving our view of God, because regardless of whether you were raised in church or not, if you were raised in this Western culture, you have an embedded theology. We have an embedded theology. And so we can really hear that when we pray. And so we talked about last week about evolving our view of God kind of away from the superhuman Santa Claus. Yeah, gives us everything we need and fixes things. And moving beyond God as that invisible parent, typically male, right, who we try to talk into things, plead with, and that we are his children. We talked about if we are forever God's children, when are we going to grow up? Yeah. And so God as bodyguard and protector a separate God that watches over us, that we bargain with, that we're afraid of, really, that we try to change his mind. And I share with you that time when I was in college and I knew that I went into an exam and I hadn't studied, and I was like, God, if you just get me through this one, I'll really study for the next one. Yeah, so that kind of view of God. And so were you able to maybe explore that this week? Because I'm giving you homework, just to look at when you pray, if you pray, or just to notice, what's your view? What's your view of God? Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, said in Talks on Truth, it is your mission to express all you can imagine God to be. You can attain to all you can imagine. So what do you hold possible for what you call the divine? Because that's really the truth of what we are. See, our search for God is our search for ourselves. And so how does it feel for you, especially if you have some, since you do have some embedded theology? I remember that when I first came to Unity from my Southern Baptist tradition, for me to hear that I'm divine was blasphemy, because I was taught that, I was born with original sin. And I would always, I don't care what I did, I would always be a sinner. And then all of a sudden I'm hearing the minister say, well, no. You were born with original blessing. You are whole. You've always been whole. You are beautiful, magnificent, perfect, complete being. No matter what you've ever been told, no matter what's ever happened to you, nothing changes it whether you believe it or not. Woohoo. And so that kind of shook me. Really? I don't even have to believe it for it to be true? So today what we're talking about is the power of affirmative prayer. Because in Unity we pray affirmatively. You notice that. We're not pleading, we're not supplicating. Oh, please, dear God. We're holding knowing. And so affirmative prayer is, an example would be, let me give you an example. So let's just say someone comes to one of our prayer chaplains after they've completed their training and they're all enlightened and someone is experiencing some illness and they want prayer. And so they listen, they hold sacred space, and they listen to whatever's on your heart. And what you might notice is different is they're not going to pray for your illness to go away. They're going to pray with you versus for you. Because what they're doing is they pray with you, they are praying with that of you that really already knows your wholeness. See, you are infinite wholeness, whether you remember that or not. And so that prayer chaplain is going to sit across from you and they're going to call that remembering forth. They're going to pray with you. They're going to hold the truth of infinite wholeness with you. And what we know is that as we hold and claim and call it forth to express, can you imagine infinite wholeness informing every single cell of your body? How that could shift what's out picturing. So that's the difference in affirmative prayer and Unity. We don't engage so much with the story. It's not that we don't honor the story. We honor your life experience, absolutely. And I say we, as prayer chaplains, as ministers. We just don't drum up all the details. We don't focus on the details. We only hold the truth with you. The story becomes kind of secondary. What's important is that we hold knowing with you what is really true. Because what we know is that if we focus on the story, nothing's going to move forward. Nothing ever shifts, moves forward, and gets better from the same energy from which it was created. So in prayer and Unity, we pray affirmatively, knowing the truth of you. And we invite you in to that knowing. Charles Fillmore also said, we are all in our personality wearing the mask that conceals the real, the spiritual I am. Yeah, so in our personality selves, we've just forgotten. That's all. And so affirmative prayer's purpose is to align your awareness with your divine identity. That's the purpose of prayer, so that you can live from that knowing. You can walk in the midst of any circumstance that you are experiencing, and as you affirm the truth of your divine identity, you can stand tall, you can stand in your knowing truly that all is well. So, the author shared some of her experience with this, and I thought it was great, and I wanted to share it with you, because she really moved through some stuff to get to some clarity about what affirmative prayer was all about. It seemed that her husband, so at the same time, her husband was laid off from the best paying position he'd ever had. She was in field licensing program, ministerial school, which meant when you're in field licensing, you have to be a part of a church community that sponsors you. And she lost her job there. So she's like, oh. And her son was a Marine and had been called to Iraq to do reconnaissance missions and was being ambushed nightly. So Linda was overwhelmed with worry and fear and sought spiritual counseling from someone who was very highly regarded. And so she goes to this counselor, and she's crying and fully in her story, wanting someone to say, and this is her words, I wanted somebody to say, oh, you poor thing. When instead, she says she was spiritually slapped when the counselor said, okay then, so you really don't believe there's one presence and one power that you are. You don't believe you are divine and therefore able to walk through this time in confidence. You don't really believe that you and your son are divine love and that there is no separation whatsoever in whatever is happening. This might seem harsh, but Linda really let those words sink in. And she didn't run out of the room screaming like she really wanted to do. Instead, she received the words and allowed them to root her in her truth. She quickly shifted into alignment with what was true. She sat up straight, she said, dried her tears and said, thank you. So see, from that point forward, instead of worrying about her husband's job, she instead went to the truth. She affirmed divine abundance was flowing. Absolutely. Infinite abundance is, no matter what. Instead of feeling powerless about her son's safety, she affirmed their oneness from the knowing of divine love is the great healer and harmonizer. Instead of asking a superhuman God to change and fix her life, she affirmed the truth of what she is. She claimed her divine identity. She stayed focused on these truths, and she said she saved herself so much anguish and worry and upheaval that many people were going through with similar situations. So we pray to know. We pray to know. And then she talked about answered prayers. So her quote is, we are the answer to our prayers as we realize prayer is not a plea for a particular outcome, but a calling upon ourselves to realize what we are. Yeah, so in that way, all of our prayers are answered. So what does this mean to us right now in your life? So in our meditation, what were you looking at? What situation was bubbling up for you? So instead of maybe saying, please God help me, we can pray, I am divine wisdom in life, and I listen and allow the infinite wisdom I am to inform my choices. I am grateful. Instead of heal me, God, what if we prayed, I am infinite life and wholeness. I claim this truth and allow it to inform every cell of my body right now. I am grateful. Instead of, I can't pay my rent, what if we affirmed, I am infinite abundance, and I know this truth and I claim it, its unlimited expression in my life right now. Yeah. So do you see the difference? Does it feel different to you? Yeah. Because, folks, that's the whole point of prayer. Remember, we're not changing an outside God's mind about anything. The point of prayer is for us to change ours. And to open our hearts and to open our minds about the truth of our divine identity. and stay rooted as much as we possibly can. And when you forget, come in here and our prayer chaplain's going to hold that knowing with you. I'll hold it with you. Because that is what's going to navigate us through whatever it is we're moving through. And when you see the news on television, instead of going, oh my God, or whatever, what can you hold? What can you hold? I claim and know that divine love is at the root of everything. I know that divine love is the great harmonizer and healer in this world, and I'm calling that forth. I call forth my own divine love. You see, every headline is a call for affirmative prayer. Every circumstance in our life is a call for affirmative prayer. To know what we are, to know that we know that we know, and to ground that prayer in gratitude. Because you know how you feel when you're really grateful? Yeah, of course, we're so grateful. And I want you to know that you're going to notice a little shift in the offering blessing today. So I've changed just one little bit of the offering blessing to divine love, I am. Instead of through me, only because if something moves through me, that means it can possibly be emptied. You see? Divine love is what we are, folks. It never goes away. It can never be emptied. We're not a vessel. We are the wholeness. So can we take a deep breath together? Yeah. So I just invite you this week just to be in this conversation with yourself. You know, maybe journal about it. Notice your prayers. Can you shift your language? Because we're not talking about semantics here. We're talking about a shift in consciousness. To I am. We are. You are. The world is. And I'm so grateful. Let's affirm together the truth. I claim and assert my divine identity in every prayer I pray. I am and know all is truly well, and so it is.